There are moments when a family's story leaves the gilded corridors of royalty and slips into the realm of uncomfortable truth. Moments when the light that once illuminated their grandeur instead exposes the cracks beneath it. Today's story is one of those moments, a story not told by palace press officers or official statements, but by the voices of those who met them, watched them, and finally decided to speak. Celebrities, journalists, and insiders who have crossed paths with Sarah Ferguson and Andrew Mountbatten, Windsor, and whose recollections now paint a portrait the monarchy never intended to frame. Before we dive in, there's something I need to share with you. Over the past few days, thousands have watched these stories unfold, but most haven't subscribed. If you're one of them, I invite you now to join us. Subscribe to Crownverse so you never miss the next chapter in this unfolding royal history. The story begins with the fall of a title and of an illusion. In late 2025, King Charles III signed formal letters patent that removed from his brother the final remnants of royal distinction. The prince became Andrew Mountbatten Windsor, a man stripped of uniforms, patronages, and the public dignity once guaranteed by birth. For Sarah Ferguson, his former wife, the decline was less official, but no less profound. She had already stopped using her Duchess style, a quiet retreat from a name that had defined her for decades. And then came the revelations that would end what remained of her public redemption, the leaked email in which she called Jeffrey Epstein a supreme friend. It was not an accusation or a rumor, it was her own written word, revived from a decade past and placed into the glare of a world that had changed too much to forgive. Within days, 7 charities from the Teenage Cancer Trust to prevent breast cancer announced they were cutting ties with her. Some statements were polite, others quietly decisive. The pattern was unmistakable. One by one, the doors closed. The timing was cruel. At the very moment her ex-husband's titles were being erased by royal decree, she found herself erased in another way from the circles of goodwill and sympathy that had sustained her since the scandals of the 1990s. For decades, Ferguson had cultivated an image of resilience. The Fergie who stumbled, who overspent, who reinvented herself as author, producer, and charity ambassador. But now the narrative was different. This time, even those who once defended her began to ask whether charm could coexist with deception. Former BBC royal correspondent Jennie Bond, a voice rarely given to harsh judgments, captured the public's mood. "My impression of her has always been that she was someone quite hard to dislike," Bond told the Mirror. "Misguided, yes. Over-enthusiastic, yes. But someone, I thought, with a good heart." Then came the pause that defined her verdict. Now, however, we know that she lied about her friendship with Epstein. And you do have to question what sort of person would do that. It was not venomous. It was weary. Bond's tone reflected what many Britons were feeling: disappointment rather than outrage. A kind of moral exhaustion with a woman who seemed to orbit the same mistakes in different decades. She allowed her debts to spiral. Bond continued. She always wanted more. More money, more recognition. That's always been her downfall. Bond's remarks carried weight, not because they were scandalous, but because they were measured. When seasoned royal correspondents begin to speak in tones of resignation rather than defense, the palace takes notice, and what followed was an avalanche of opinion. The actor, Michael Sheen, preparing for his role as Andrew in Amazon's A Very Royal Scandal, gave voice to a different kind of observation, not accusation, but bewilderment. "There's a mystery at the heart of who Andrew is," he told The Hollywood Reporter, "and what he did or didn't do." For an actor celebrated for his portrayals of real people, that sentence was revealing. When a man's own essence becomes unreadable, even to those paid to study it, something fundamental has been lost. Sheen described the challenge of portraying a royal whose public persona had collapsed, but whose private self remained shrouded in denial. "You look for the humanity," he said, "but with Andrew, there's a silence behind the words, a kind of distance from consequence. It was an observation that mirrored the public perception of both Andrew and Sarah, a couple adrift, still circling the edges of privilege, but untethered from its purpose. If the actor's words carried the nuance of interpretation, the journalist Emily Maitlis brought the authority of history. It was Maitlis who, in 2019, had conducted the Newsnight interview now regarded as one of the most disastrous moments in modern royal media. Years later, she reflected on it with precision, not malice. Prince Andrew, she said, lost his royal duties, his right to wear uniform, the respect of the nation. She paused, before adding what might be the most haunting part of her reflection, and yet, we don't know if Epstein's victims gained anything from that. There was no trial, only a settlement. No closure. That statement reframed the scandal. It reminded viewers that the real tragedy was not reputational, it was moral. Whatever humiliation the Duke endured could not undo the suffering at the root of the story, and perhaps that's why the public's patience for the couple's excuses finally ran out. It was not merely that they had been careless, it was that they had been careless again. Among the many recollections to surface, few were as startling as the account of actress and television personality Denise Welch. On the talk show, Loose Women, she recalled an encounter with Andrew that had lingered for decades. It was 1997, the year the nation was still raw from the death of Princess Diana. At a gala dinner, Welch and her then-husband sat near the Duke of York. "We'd decided not to mention Diana," she said. "It was too soon, but Andrew did. He started saying things that really upset me, things I found deeply disrespectful, to someone he shouldn't have been speaking about in that way." Described confronting him and his curt, dismissive response. According to her account, he rose from the table, placed a hand on her husband's shoulder, and said, "Rather you than me, sir." The studio audience gasped as she recounted it. "I absolutely told him how I felt," she added. "I was very, very cross." It was a small anecdote, but in the context of Andrew's later scandals, it resonated. Here was a woman describing not a crime, but a character, a man unable to read the room, tone-deaf to decency, even in grief. The segment was titled, "Have We Lost Our Love for the Royals?" And in that moment, the answer seemed self-evident. Across these interviews and commentaries, a composite portrait began to form, not of two villains, but of two people trapped in self-perpetuating delusion: Sarah Ferguson, forever reinventing, forever falling; Andrew Mountbatten Windsor, unable, or unwilling to see the wreckage behind him. Their defenders have dwindled. Even among royal circles, the tone has shifted from sympathy to strategy. According to several reports, the king's advisors now regard both as unrecoverable, too toxic to rehabilitate, too well known to ignore. And yet, the fascination endures. Why? Perhaps because their story contains the elements that define the royal myth itself: privilege, love, scandal, and exile. For decades, the Yorks were the monarchy's human side, flawed, but relatable. They were the ones who laughed too loudly, who loved too openly, who failed in public. Now, they have become its cautionary tale. The irony is that Sarah Ferguson was once considered the monarchy's greatest survivor. After her divorce, after the toe-sucking headlines, after the debt crises and the humiliating tabloid exposes, she rebuilt herself. She became a public speaker, a charity advocate, a writer of children's books. She launched lifestyle brands, appeared on American television, and even produced a film about Queen Victoria. Through it all, she retained a kind of unpolished warmth, the ability to laugh at herself, to make others feel seen. That quality once endeared her to the public. But charm, it turns out, is not the same as character. The revelation that she had described Epstein, a convicted sex offender, as a supreme friend, and later appeared to apologize for criticizing him, shattered the fragile trust she had regained. When she later told reporters she couldn't remember the email, the denial only deepened the disappointment. To forget a man like Epstein is not a lapse of memory. It's a failure of moral clarity. Still, not everyone has turned away. Some celebrities who have known Ferguson personally describe her as well-intentioned but easily led. Few argue that she is more naive than malicious, a woman desperate for acceptance in a world that long ago stopped forgiving her missteps. That is speculation, not evidence, but it reveals the tension that defines her image between sympathy and scorn, between the woman she wants to be and the one the world insists she is. Andrew's case is more severe. Unlike Ferguson, whose misjudgments are social, his are existential. He faces not gossip, but history. His public defense, the infamous assertion that he could not sweat, his alibi of dining at a pizza restaurant, became global shorthand for absurdity. What began as damage control ended as parody. No amount of royal protocol asterisk can recover a reputation once reduced to meme. Yet even now, there are those in his circle who insist that Andrew remains misunderstood, that his misfortune lies not in guilt but in arrogance, an inability to comprehend that apology requires humility. Inside the palaces, whispers suggest that his brother's patience has reached its limit. When the king's private secretary drafted the notice that formally removed Andrew's styles and honors, it was said to have been met with a long silence at the family table. No confrontation, no argument, just the quiet acknowledgement of finality. And through it all, Sarah remains, still publicly supportive of the man she once divorced, still referring to him affectionately as my handsome ex-husband. To some, this is loyalty. To others, complicity. Even now, she is said to have stayed by his side as the Royal Lodge eviction looms. Though her own future home remains uncertain, it is a strange kind of devotion, part love, part inertia, bound by shared history and mutual scandal. But if Ferguson's image has suffered under the weight of scandal, it has also become the subject of fascination for cultural commentators. Is she, as Jennie Bond once suggested, simply a woman of hopeless finances and too much heart, or is she the product of a royal system that prizes appearances until the moment they fracture? Her story could be read as tragic. A woman who mistook proximity to power for power itself, who built her life around connections that could never save her. Or, it could be read as something darker. The refusal to learn. The comfort of denial. Every public apology she has ever given has been followed, years later, by another. Her cycle is not redemption, but repetition. And yet, the fascination remains, because in the wreckage of her reputation, people see the reflection of something larger, the brittleness of royal modernity. The monarchy, once protected by distance, is now devoured by access. The same openness that humanized it has also exposed its frailties. Andrew and Sarah are the first generation to live entirely under that light and to perish by it. Their downfall has become entertainment. Their names fill thumbnails, headlines, documentaries, podcasts. But behind every frame lies a quieter question. What happens when the institution that once sanctified you now needs to survive without you? For Sarah Ferguson, the answer may lie not in exile but in silence. In recent months, she has withdrawn from social events, rarely photographed except at private gatherings. Her Instagram account, once a stream of motivational posts and book promotions, has gone dormant. Friends describe her as introspective, tired, and disappointed in the world. Whether this marks contrition or retreat is unclear, but in a world where she once thrived on attention, absence speaks volumes. For Andrew, the silence is absolute. No public appearances, no official correspondence, no royal insignia on his uniform. His existence now feels suspended. A man of titles without title, a prince without a kingdom. And so the task of narrating their legacy has fallen to others. Actors, journalists, and commentators who once observed from afar and now define their image through reflection. Each voice adds a fragment. Jennie Bond with her disillusionment, Michael Sheen with his empathy and distance, Emily Maitlis with her precision and grace, Denise Welch with her righteous indignation. Together, They tell the story of a couple undone, not by conspiracy, but by character. But beneath the commentary, a deeper question remains unanswered. Can a reputation ever truly die in the age of perpetual revelation? Or does every apology, every rediscovered email, every documentary simply keep the embers glowing? Sarah Ferguson and Andrew Mountbatten Windsor are now part of the cultural archive. No longer figures of authority, but subjects of analysis. Their images will outlive their deeds, circulating endlessly through screens, reenactments, and interviews. And that may be the final irony of their story. For people who once craved attention, they will now receive it forever, only without control. There is a photograph that lingers from better days, taken in the late 1980s. At Balmoral, the Duke and Duchess of York stand together, young and radiant, laughing at something unseen beyond the frame. Behind them, the Scottish hills fade into mist. It was a picture meant to symbolize renewal, the next generation of royal love. No one could have guessed how brief that brightness would be. Decades later, the same laughter echoes differently, not joy, but irony. History has developed the photograph in darker tones, and so, as the monarchy moves forward, reshaped by a king, determined to streamline its soul, the Yorks remain a reminder of what happens when privilege outpaces principle. Their story is not just scandal, it is consequence. What do you think? Have Sarah Ferguson and Andrew Mountbatten Windsor become victims of their own choices, or of a monarchy that no longer shields those who fail its image? And can reputation ever be redeemed when truth itself becomes public property? Share your thoughts in the comments below, because the story of redemption, like royalty, only survives if people still believe in it.